Welcome. Today we will delve into the darkest and most mysterious episode of the Guadalcanal campaign's beginning, the moment when the fate of the Pacific hung in the balance. On the night of August 8th, the Japanese fleet departed from the area near Buna to completely alter the outcome of the night engagement, and possibly the entire campaign. But what was hidden behind the fog of that night? Why, despite their strength and tactical preparation, was the Japanese fleet unable to realize its potential? At the same time, how did the Allied forces, with their limited intelligence and weak response, find themselves defenseless against this assault? In just 1 hour, more than 5 heavy cruisers of the Japanese fleet, deprived of aircraft carriers after Midway, attempted to break through dangerous waters, while their opponents, inadequately prepared and late, found themselves in the thick of the night battle. Why did the Japanese command, armed with knowledge and night tactics, fail to fully capitalize on the situation? And how did the outcome of that night determine the course of the entire campaign? In this investigation, we will unravel all these mysteries, separate the official chronicle from hidden facts, and reveal who was truly orchestrating this battle. Are you ready to see the hidden cards and unexpected decisions that changed the history of the Pacific? Then let's begin. In the dark depths of the Pacific Ocean, on a night when it seemed that fate was decided in millimeters and seconds, one of the most tense and mysterious chapters of the Guadalcanal battle began. Everything was prepared and anticipated, or at least, that's what it seemed. But behind this apparent order lay dangers, uncertainty, and risks that could have changed everything. The entire strategic context of the Pacific War had reached a boiling point. The Japanese fleet, deprived of aircraft carriers after the dramatic Battle of Midway, still remained a dangerous opponent, especially in night combat, where their tactics and naval cunning could produce unexpected results. The Allies, under the command of Admiral John S. McCain Sr., were preparing for an ambitious operation, the landing on Guadalcanal, to secure their positions and halt the Japanese advance. But their intelligence was still lacking, not revealing the full picture that could have altered the outcome of the ongoing engagement. And it was precisely on this night, August 8th, that the Japanese fleet appeared on the horizon, moving from the Pacific port of Rabaul, like a shadow that was destined to change the fate of the entire campaign. At dawn, when the first rays of the sun began to pierce through the clouds, the Japanese squadron, consisting of 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 1 destroyer, reached the area near Bougainville Island. This was no coincidence. In the hours prior, Japanese ships had been moving across the sea, employing night tactics and prepared night lookouts to conceal their intentions and prepare for an unexpected attack. Their goal was to disrupt the Allied landing plans, destroy key ships, and strengthen their position in the region. Part 2 of 14. They had time on their side. The night concealed their movements, and everything suggested that the Japanese had a high chance of success. But behind this mysterious calmness lay anxiety. What were their true capabilities? Did they have the potential to fully realize all their tactical advantages? Almost all of the aviation support, which could have been their strongest weapon, was lost after Midway. And it was precisely aviation that could have been a decisive factor in a night battle. Its absence, however, put the Japanese fleet in a highly vulnerable position. Meanwhile, Allied forces, including Australian scouts, had already detected the approaching Japanese fleet. Their radars and observation posts were operating at their limits, but alerts and warnings were delayed, often ignored or misinterpreted. Time was critical. Every minute, every movement could be decisive. American and Australian scouts saw the dark silhouettes of ships, heard the hum of engines, and felt the approaching danger. But their warnings reached command too late, or not at all. At this moment, the question arose: could the Japanese implement their tactical training under conditions of limited aviation support? And what was their true motivation? They knew that the night was their ally, and that their night attack tactics had already proven effective in previous battles. But did they have the opportunity to fully exploit this tactic, given the challenging conditions and limited aviation support? And what truly motivated the Japanese command? Was it the desire for a swift and decisive strike, or the fear of losing everything in case of failure? The central question of this night was whether the Japanese fleet, armed with its tactics and nocturnal cunning, could fully realize its potential and disrupt the landing at Guadalcanal. Or, conversely, having faced limited resources and unforeseen circumstances, did it lose the chance to turn the tide of events? The issue was not only about tactics and strength, it also involved the ability to adapt, the psychological readiness of commanders, and the technologies that could prove decisive. In conditions where the night concealed everything and the enemy was somewhere nearby, every ship and every decision could be the last. And at this moment, in this dark and dangerous confrontation, something greater was happening than just a naval battle. It was a clash of strategies and possibilities, a struggle for control, initiative, and the future of the campaign. But what ultimately decided the outcome? Which unexpected circumstances and decisions shaped the result of this night engagement? What secret maneuvers and hidden tactics played their part? And how did all this influence the development of the entire campaign? For every moment, every decision, every event seemed to be later regarded by historians as a turning point. In this night, filled with darkness and danger, the fate of hundreds of lives, the future of the islands, and the strategic balance in the Pacific were at stake. The outcome of this clash, despite its complexity, became not only a reflection of combat capabilities, but also a symbol of how unpredictable and chaotic war can be. It is precisely these nighttime battles, these moments when it seems everything is decided and all is lost, that create the drama inherent in the history of great naval engagements. After all, what unexpected circumstances and decisions, what secret motives and hidden strategies determined the course of that night, and consequently, the fate of the entire Guadalcanal campaign? The answer to this question is key to understanding the entire tragedy and heroism that unfolded in the dark depths of Pacific waters. In early June 1942, the Pacific Ocean witnessed one of the pivotal battles of World War II, the Battle of Midway. This fight, shrouded in the mists of history, was not merely a clash of ships and aircraft. It became a decisive test for the Japanese fleet, its strategic thinking, and ultimately, for the entire military campaign in the Pacific. The defeat at Midway marked a turning point when Japan's fate seemed to hang by a thread, and the outcome of that battle determined the future of the entire regional war. In the early days of June, the sky over Midway was filled with the roar of thousands of aircraft. Over the course of several days, Japanese aircraft carriers, once considered an invincible force, came under heavy fire from Allied planes. Eyewitness accounts, documents, and recovered archives testify that in a short period, Japanese aviation lost an unprecedented number of combat-ready aircraft. As a result, 4 aircraft carriers, considered among the most modern and formidable ships of the Imperial fleet, were destroyed. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu became symbols of the tragedy that unfolded in the heart of the Pacific. The loss of these ships meant not just the loss of combat units for the Japanese fleet, but a severe blow to its strategic strength. Let's look at the facts. The destruction of the carriers was not merely a defeat in a naval battle. It was a strategic defeat that shook the foundations of Japanese naval doctrine. Before Midway, the Japanese relied on the concept of night battles, superiority of cruisers, and the tactic of surprise attacks. Their strategy was built on speed, stealth, and the ability to strike where the enemy least expected. However, this time, American aviation, supported by reconnaissance capabilities and technological innovations, managed to outsmart the Japanese. Their aircraft, despite numerical inferiority, demonstrated remarkable accuracy and persistence. Testimonies from pilots and commanders show that the Japanese were caught off guard, and their tactics proved insufficient against the new form of naval warfare, carrier-based. These losses became not only tactical but also symbolic. Within the Japanese command, a reassessment of tactical approaches began. The traditional strategy, based on night battles and powerful cruisers, could no longer guarantee victory. Gradually, the Japanese began to realize that their previous approach was outdated, and that new strategies and methods of combat needed to be explored. Internal debates, hidden behind closed doors in the headquarters, became increasingly intense. How to maintain combat effectiveness and prestige when losses were mounting and opportunities were shrinking. Within the Japanese fleet, there arose a need not just to adapt, but to completely rethink their tactics in order to prevent another catastrophe. The moral aspect was also not overlooked. Testimonies from veterans, commanders' diaries, and analytical reports show that the defeat at Midway had a devastating impact on the morale of the Japanese military leadership. Internal disputes over the correctness of the chosen strategy and the necessity for change reflected a deep crisis that had engulfed the Japanese fleet. Were these losses the collapse of Japanese military thought? Could they have been avoided? These questions, which had long remained unanswered, grew more urgent. It was not just a tactical failure. It was a blow to the entire system, to the entire concept of conducting naval warfare. Meanwhile, despite the defeat at Midway, the Japanese did not lean towards surrender. They continued to strengthen their defenses both within the country and on the islands. The war in the Pacific was not only a struggle for territory, but also for ideas, for the perception of power and invincibility. On other islands, in the New Hebrides and the Solomon Islands, the Japanese kept building fortifications and bolstering their positions to prepare for a possible new American campaign. In their eyes, what was happening was not only a tactical confrontation, but a battle for national honor and the future of the empire. But the main question looming over all this was, how did the defeat at Midway change Japan's strategic approach? How did it influence preparations for subsequent battles in the Solomon Islands? Within the Japanese command, there arose a need not just for rethinking, but for a complete revision of tactics. Could the Japanese fleet continue to persist in night battles despite obvious failures? Why, despite heavy losses and growing concerns, did they keep betting on night encounters and tactics that had already proven vulnerable? These questions were crucial. They determined the fate of the Japanese fleet and ultimately its ability to hold the line. And this is where the core of this story lies. Why, despite obvious losses and internal crises, did the Japanese fleet persist in night battles? Why, despite all evidence of the ineffectiveness of old tactics, did they refuse to abandon them? And how did these decisions influence the outcome of future engagements? What is the strategic and psychological essence behind them? These questions require not only historical analysis, but also a deep understanding of military psychology, national pride, and the technological limitations of that era. Answers to these questions help to understand not only specific events, but also the broader context. The era when technology was changing the rules of the game, and the spirit of the empire continued to fight for its place in the sun, even as the sun was already setting behind the horizon of defeat. In the dark depths of the Pacific Ocean, among endless waters where waves gently touch the rocks, lies one of the most decisive chapters of World War II. It was not just an operation. It was a breakthrough attempt, a gamble on risk, with the fate of the strategic balance hanging on a thin thread. At the very beginning of summer 1942, when the world still teetered on the brink, and the destinies of empires were decided in the shadows of diplomatic intrigues and military secrets, the Allies received crucial intelligence. They learned about the Japanese command's construction of a powerful airfield on Guadalcanal, an island located in the very heart of the Pacific. This airfield promised to become not only a strategic base, but also a threat to the entire maritime communication line, connecting Australia, America, and the rest of the Allied forces. Evidence confirmed by numerous intelligence sources indicated that the Japanese had already begun active construction, and in the coming months, their efforts could lead to the creation of a formidable airbase capable of controlling a vast part of the Pacific. But what to do when the facts speak for themselves? When intelligence, even thorough, remains essentially only part of the picture that must be assembled into a complete image. At this moment, when the danger became obvious, the Allied command decided to take a risk. The operation plan, codenamed Watchtower, was developed in haste and under imperfect oversight. Their goal was not only to disrupt the construction of the Japanese airfield, but also to halt the expansion of Japanese influence in this strategic region. The operation involved landing forces on the islands of Tulagi and Guadalcanal, small but extremely significant points that could serve as footholds for further actions. It was not just an attack, it was a challenge to fate, a challenge to the capabilities and weaknesses of both sides. The use of a flotilla consisting of more than 80 ships became a true test for commanders and sailors. Most vessels operated under conditions where the sky was shrouded in fog, and the night was like a dense veil hiding them from the enemy. Time was against them. Shadows, blurred silhouettes, quiet rustling of waves, and the muffled sounds of engines created an atmosphere of tense anticipation, where every moment could be the last. In these conditions, in the silence broken only by the sound of surf and the echo of commands, the struggle for control over the fate was underway. The most crucial factor was the operational agility of the Japanese command under Vice Admiral Mikawa. He was not just a strategist, he was a man who understood that every move, every decision could be decisive. His forces were highly responsive, aiming to intercept and destroy the Allied landing forces in order to thwart their plans and regain the initiative. Here, at the edge of possibility, a problem arose that became a stumbling block for the entire operation. Intelligence shortcomings, poor preparation, lack of timely warning signals created fertile ground for the Japanese fleet. The time advantage held by the enemy worked against the Allies. Their plans seemed to depend on speed and precision, factors that, this time, might prove insufficient. The question that troubled everyone was whether they could successfully execute their strategy despite these risks, or if all their efforts would be in vain, with the enemy already one step ahead. How well was their strategy adapted to potential dangers? And most importantly, what price might this risky, spontaneous operation cost? The central conflict running through this chapter concerns the Allies' preparation and tactical decisions. How exactly did their strategy, their ability to respond quickly, and their capacity to adapt influence the outcome of this sudden and risky operation? In this struggle for control over sea routes and the avoidance of mistakes, every minute and every decision could be decisive. The focus was not only on military tactics, but also on the psychological aspect. How fear, uncertainty, time pressure, and the fear of failure affected commanders. How their decisions were made under conditions where any mistake could cost hundreds of lives and the entire campaign's outcome. But what if all this was not only a matter of tactics and strategy? What if, deeper than the dry facts and figures, a more subtle and troubling truth was hidden? Why could spontaneity and oversight become the factors that completely changed the course of the campaign? Why, at this very moment, on the brink of success or failure, in conditions where everything seemed decided, could human error, inattention, or simple oversight have catastrophic effects? These questions are not only about military operations, but also serve as a lesson on how the slightest oversight, underestimation of risk, or neglect can alter the outcome of events, influence the fates of thousands, and forever write their mark in history. This is where the main message lies: how preparation, strategy, and the human factor interact under conditions of high uncertainty, and how even the most carefully planned operation can be vulnerable in the face of unforeseen circumstances. At the end of this story are not only facts, evidence, and strategic decisions, but also a deeper meaning. Why spontaneity and oversight in preparation could completely change the course of the Guadalcanal campaign, and how this lesson remains relevant even decades later. Because in war, as in any other field, it is the human factor, human weakness, and the capacity for surprises that determine the outcome of the most fateful battle. On that fateful day, August 8, 1942, in the vast waters of the Pacific Ocean, as the sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, the Japanese fleet under Admiral Mikawa's command embarked on its decisive voyage. Their ships, like shadows, emerged from the area near Buka, a strategic base located in the southern part of the archipelago, close to Japan, and headed along the tropical trade corridor. This route, dangerous and winding, passed through the so-called Sari Strait, or the Slot, a narrow strait known for its unpredictable nature and hidden threats. In these waters, not only dangerous currents and concealed reefs lurked, but also potential enemies, submarines, and aerial patrols from the Allies. The movement of the Japanese fleet was not merely a transfer, it was a strategic act designed to catch the enemy off guard. But even as Mikawa's ships left their bases, alarm was already in the air. Near the St. George's Channel, a narrow strait connecting a large maritime area with inland waters, the Japanese fleet encountered the USS S-38 submarine. Evidence indicates that contact was made, and for several minutes, the Japanese had to engage in tactical combat. However, contrary to expectations, Mikawa's commander, aware of the possible consequences, chose not to pursue the submarine. Why? Because, apparently, he understood that revealing his positions now would be a direct path to destruction. In conditions where intelligence and counterintelligence were pushed to the limit, and every second could decide the outcome of the battle, any risk was unacceptable. When the Japanese reached the Bougainville area, they made a tactical decision to disperse. This was not a random movement, but a carefully planned maneuver. Over the course of several hours, the ships split up, concealing their true intentions, while commanders sent reconnaissance aircraft to gather information. During these moments, the air was filled with the roar of engines, piercing screams of radio signals, and quiet commands issued in the ship's mess halls. Aircraft, rising into the sky like hunters, circled over the horizon, seeking signs of an approaching enemy. Australian scouts, monitoring the movements of the Japanese fleet, tracked their routes, noted minute changes in their paths, and observed dispersal and covert maneuvers. But for mysterious reasons, which still provoke debate among historians, the Allies did not take active measures. They did not strike or organize an interception. Why? Ambiguous, but it seems that at this moment, the Japanese created an illusion of complete invulnerability, and their evasion tactics were so effective that the Allies could not predict their exact position. Mikawa, like a master of illusions, employed tactics of flanking, evasion, and constant movement to confuse the enemy. His goal was to preserve forces for the final, decisive attack. Every decision he made was infused with cold calculation. Each change of course was the result of deep analysis and strategic planning. The question now before us is, how effective was this Japanese tactic? Could the Allies, despite their extensive intelligence network, foresee their true position? Or was Mikawa able to deceive everyone, leaving the enemy in constant uncertainty and fear? An important aspect is also the pressure experienced by the Japanese fleet. Constant air patrols, reconnaissance aircraft, radio signals, all of this created the impression that the enemy knew every move. But, on the other hand, it was this activity that forced Mikawa to seek new routes and methods of bypassing. He was under constant pressure, both from aerial and naval reconnaissance. Their continuous presence created a psychological strain, compelling commanders to seek new paths and strategies. In this context, the main question of this chapter arises: was Admiral Mikawa able to effectively utilize all available intelligence and his tactical tricks to prepare the final strike? Or did his strategy, based on avoidance and evasion, turn out to be merely an illusion of protection that could collapse at any moment? After all, the longer the Japanese remained unaware of the enemy's true position, the greater the chances of mistake. And if the Allies had foreseen their real location, could they have prepared countermeasures and struck earlier? Meanwhile, the entire Japanese fleet lived in constant tension. Their position was unstable, their roots part of a complex puzzle. Continuous intelligence pressure, the possibility of discovery at any moment, all dictated their actions. They took risks, hoping that their evasions and maneuvers would keep them safe until the moment for a decisive blow. But this very strategy, avoidance and evasion, carried enormous risks. What were they? Loss of time, the possibility of being exposed, betrayal, navigation errors. Could this risk turn into catastrophe? And how did it influence the subsequent outcome of the battle? This question is the central conflict of the entire chapter. Was Mikawa able, using intelligence and his tactical cunning, to prepare the final strike? Or did his evasion strategy become a trap from which escape was impossible? In every movement, every course change, there was not only hope for success, but also the danger of failure, which could cost the entire fleet's lives. And so, in this complex theater of strategic maneuvers, in this game of survival, emerges the main thematic twist. What risks did the evasion strategy entail, and how did it influence the subsequent course of the battle and the fate of the entire operation? After all, ultimately, this story is not just about tactics and intelligence, but about human will, about the line between success and failure, about how one person, one commander, can influence the destinies of many ships, playing a game where the stakes are everything. And it was precisely on this unstable edge, on this thin line between risk and calculation, that the fate of not only the Japanese fleet, but also the entire Guadalcanal campaign was decided. On that night, when darkness enveloped Guadalcanal and clouds obscured the sky, the Japanese fleet began its operation with precision and planning that stunned Allied military analysts and strategists. This attack, highly covert and daring, became a vivid example of tactics that later entered naval manuals, the tactics of night warfare. But what exactly happened on that cursed night? How did the Japanese, armed not only with ships, but also with the art of concealment, manage to penetrate the very heart of the enemy? What factors played in their favor, and which worked against them? Before dawn, when only the faint glow of the first stars pierced the night darkness, the Japanese fleet approached Guadalcanal. In the air, above the calm surface of the Pacific Ocean, 3 reconnaissance aircraft soared, invisible, like ghosts, climbing into the sky to locate targets. Their mission was clear, as with all operations of this level, to find and identify Allied ships, to prepare the ground for an assault. But it is here, in these first moments, that the mysterious game begins, which will determine the outcome of the entire night. Evidence suggests that the radio communication systems on the Allied ships were not as advanced as desired. At the moment when the Japanese reconnaissance planes were already returning to their carriers, the alarm signal had not yet been raised, as if commands had not reached the command posts. Was this a misunderstanding, a technical malfunction, or a deliberate oversight? The question remains open. Time was passing, and the Allied ships continued modestly on their routes, unaware that danger was brewing in the shadows of the night. The Japanese fleet, a master of its craft, moved on to the next stage, the tactic of blind infiltration. In conditions of absolute darkness, when even the most advanced detection systems seemed useless, they relied on trained night lookouts. These soldiers, trained specifically, knew how to move across ships and between them without making noise, how not to leave traces. Their task was to ensure that the enemy did not notice the approach of the Japanese vessels. And undoubtedly, this was one of the greatest strengths of Japanese tactics, the art of stealth and precise action in the dark. Time was passing. Soon, in almost complete darkness, in the area where the Allied ships were positioned in anticipation of dawn, the Japanese fleet began its operation. At 0144, when most naval command posts were still sleeping or engaged in routine activities, the ships of Mikawa detected one of the American vessels, USS Blue. Evidence confirms that the alarm signal about the enemy's approach was weak, perhaps even imperceptible. The transmission of information about the appearance of Japanese ships was delayed or misinterpreted. As a result, The Allies were unable to prepare for the attack in time. And so, in the midst of complete darkness, Japanese ships broke through near the American fleet. They entered the battle like shadows, like ghosts, without warning, without unnecessary noise. A fierce naval fight began in a short span of time. The roar of cannons, flashes of explosions, shouts of commands. All of this occurred in absolute darkness. Evidence suggests that Japanese tactics, utilizing the night darkness, trained night fighters, and precise intelligence, played a decisive role. In this battle, where light and visual cues were almost absent, the Japanese felt like masters of the ocean. But why couldn't the Allies counter this? Why didn't their detection systems activate? How was it possible that, under conditions where technology should have ensured instant reaction, Japanese tactics proved unbeatable? Analysis shows that the key factor was the lack of timely warning and insufficient preparation for night conditions. While the enemy used the night as a protective shield, the Allied forces remained unprepared for this type of combat. Their systems, radars, radio communications, visual observations, proved insufficiently effective precisely in darkness, and this became their weakness. At the same time, Japanese lookouts and night fighters operated flawlessly. Their training, their skills, all of this created the illusion of invincible tactics. In complete darkness, covertly and without errors, they achieved their objectives, destroying the enemy's hopes for quick and clear reactions. In this hidden world of night warfare, the Japanese won not only due to technological superiority, but also thanks to mastery of camouflage, psychological preparation, and proper tactical application. The central question of that night: were the Japanese able to fully implement their strategy? Did they succeed, in conditions where everything seemed against them, in achieving their goals? The answer, it seems, is yes. They penetrated the enemy's rear, created chaos, and left behind destruction and bewilderment. But most importantly, they showed the world that night, this complete darkness can become their ally if they know how to use it. That night became not only a turning point in the naval battle, but also a lesson for future generations of military strategists. How did that night end? What lessons were learned from this bloody spectacle? And how did this tactic influence the further development of naval combat? Ultimately, that night demonstrated that in war, power alone is not enough. It is also essential to master the darkness, to prevent the enemy from responding. And this was the key to the Japanese fleet's victory during those fateful hours. Deep in the night, when darkness envelops the ocean and the stars seem frozen in silent stillness, a sudden roar erupts, the first strikes of the Japanese fleet. This was no random collision or accidental mistake. It was a carefully planned and daring attack that would change the course of the war in the Pacific. At this moment, when most Allied commanders had not yet realized the danger, Japanese ships, driven by determination and strategic cunning, broke through the enemy's defenses, employing surprise tactics and night combat. Time was their ally, and it played against them. Just 30 minutes past midnight, the Japanese fleet reached a critical point, and the moment when the fate of millions hung on a thin line was recorded forever. Mikawa, commander of the Japanese fleet, stood on the bridge of one of his cruisers. His eyes, filled with resolve and cold confidence, tracked the approaching targets. In his hands was the fate of the warships, and in his heart, hope for a strategic victory that could change the course of the war. He knew that the night was his ally, and used all tactical opportunities to deliver the most devastating strike. In this battle, Japanese ships did not just attack, they destroyed. The first salvo shattered the silence. Explosions, fire, and smoke enveloped the sky. At their center were American destroyers and cruisers, whose command staff and crews were unprepared for such an assault. Meanwhile, in the rear, on the American ships, panic reigned. Time was against them, and their retaliatory actions proved inadequate. Within minutes, as if an invisible knife, Japanese shells pierced the armor of the ships, causing endless explosions and fires. The blasts tore through hulls, crying out the deaths of sailors who had not been evacuated or saved in time. Explosions, light, noise, and the smell of burning metal created a hellish atmosphere, where every moment could be the last. Despite the heroism of their crews, American ships became victims of Japanese tactical superiority and technological advantage. Control over the situation disappeared for the Allies like a shadow in the night. They lost not only ships but also confidence, and all this happened within a matter of minutes. The losses were catastrophic. Over 1,000 American sailors died that night, their bodies carried by the waves, their screams drowned out by the roar of battle. The Japanese casualties, only a few dozen, seemed insignificant compared to the horror that engulfed the Allied fleets. This asymmetry became not only a fact but also a symptom, evidence of how ineffective reconnaissance had been, how weak the command was, unable to foresee or respond in time to the threat. Why were the Allies unable to anticipate such an operation? Why did their intelligence systems prove so unreliable? These questions, still unanswered, haunted military analysts and historians. Most of the Allied ships were heavily damaged or completely sunk. Those who survived found themselves in a state close to total destruction. Their crews, many of them, bore their losses, their pain and disappointment. All their tactics, all their experience, seemed to vanish in an instant when the dark night turned into a scene of tragedy. They lost control of the situation, and this defeat became not only a material loss but also a symbol of vulnerability that no one had expected. The question that haunts historians is, could this nightmare have been prevented? Why were the commanders unable to recognize the threat, and why was no warning prepared that could have changed the outcome? Despite suffering heavy losses, there were many. The Japanese fleet achieved its objective. They not only inflicted damage on American ships, but also halted the Allied landing on the shores. A strategic victory, albeit at the cost of their own losses, proved to be the most crucial. It was a blow to the enemy's morale and strategic infrastructure, demonstrating to the world that the Japanese fleet was capable of bold, lightning-fast, and deadly effective strikes. Their success sowed fear, distrust, and disappointment among Allied commanders, who suddenly realized that victory in this battle was not solely determined by numbers or technology. Sometimes it depends on surprise, cunning, and determination. The central question of that night was, why did the Allies allow such a large loss of ships and sailors? Why were their reconnaissance systems and operational responses so weak? And how did this defeat influence subsequent operations? These questions are not merely historical facts, but a living lesson, one that should have changed approaches to naval combat, training, intelligence, and strategic thinking. This entire nightmarish event was not only a tragedy, but also a turning point that forever changed Allied naval tactics and strategy. But what happened next? What lessons were learned from this nightmare? What changes occurred in tactics, reconnaissance, and command training? And how did that night influence future naval battles? These questions require not only historical analysis, but also deep reflection, because it is from past mistakes that new strategies and victories are born, even after the darkest nights. And it was this tragic night that became the point that forever altered the course of the war, reminding the world that in battle, strength alone is not enough. Foresight, readiness for the unexpected, and the ability to react instantly are equally vital. On that night, when waves merged with the relentless darkness of the sky, one of the most unexpected and fateful battles in the history of 20th century naval conflicts erupted. It was not just a clash of ships or a fight for control over strategic routes. It was a battle that determined the fate of the Guadalcanal campaign and ultimately the entire Pacific War. And it all began with a decision made by one man, the commander of the Japanese fleet, Captain Mikawa, who, despite the chaos of the night engagement, issued a retreat order. This command, seemingly simple, was rooted in profound strategic meaning. It saved the Allied transports from complete destruction, preserved the possibility for future operations, and ultimately became the key to maintaining control over the island. But let's look a little deeper. After the fire from Japanese ships and aircraft subsided, a tense silence reigned on the decks and in the command bunkers. Testimonies from those who survived that night show that at that moment, Mikawa understood. If he ordered a full pursuit, he risked losing everything. The fate of the ships, the sailors, and ultimately the entire campaign was in his hands. He chose a different path: retreat. This order, given under extreme uncertainty, was not just an act of salvation, but a strategic decision that changed the course of events. It prevented an apocalypse for the Allied transports, which otherwise would have been destroyed in a full-scale night attack. But what did this decision mean for the Japanese fleet? As the Japanese looked at the wrecked ships, a question arose. Why did they abandon the pursuit? Why, despite having the opportunity to finish off the enemy, did the captains decide to leave him alive? Hidden within this is a mysterious and simultaneously dramatic aspect. After a hard night, the Japanese fleet realized that the chase to destroy the Allies was not worth risking complete exhaustion of their forces. Their strategic position seemed to require a different tactic: holding the line and avoiding unnecessary risks, which later played a role in changing the campaign's dynamics. Analysis shows that this choice, to leave the enemy alive, became a lesson for the Japanese command. They underestimated the power of night naval battles, their tactical cunning, and the ability to launch sudden attacks. The Allies, in turn, used daytime raids, the same naval and air operations, to strengthen their positions, deliver reinforcements, and gather resources. Unlike night battles, daytime raids were more predictable, but they carried their own dangers. Every delivery, every raid was a risk, as the Japanese continued to strike at sea communications, trying to disrupt the island's supply lines. Nevertheless, despite losses, ships, sailors, combat vessels, Guadalcanal remained under Allied control. Their resilience and tactical skill allowed them to maintain the bridgehead, even amid multiple Japanese attacks, which seemingly should have destroyed everything. Yet, it was precisely the mistakes in command, both underestimating the enemy's night tactics and misallocating forces, that became lessons no side could ignore. These lessons later led to a reassessment of strategic approaches, strengthening intelligence and control over maritime communications, which later became critically important in the struggle for dominance in the Pacific. Analysis shows that the impact of that night, with its drama, mistakes, and heroism, extended far beyond the battle itself. It was an event that cemented the idea of the necessity of constant reconnaissance, the importance of controlling sea routes, and that every night, every decision at sea could become a turning point in the fate of the war. The question before us is, how exactly did this victory and the subsequent strategic decisions influence the long-term strategy of the Allied forces in the Pacific? And the answer is not so simple. It lies deep within the analysis of history, in understanding that control over maritime communications, the ability to respond quickly, and the correct assessment of the situation became the keys to victory. But the main conflict of this story is, why did the Japanese fleet refuse to pursue their opponents? What motives and considerations guided the captains on that critical night? After all, the opportunity to end the battle with a complete victory was within their grasp. Why did they stop? This question is at the heart of the entire strategy and the drama of those events. Evidence, documents, and radio intercepts show that the Japanese were forced to make a difficult decision, based not only on tactics, but also on a conscious choice to avoid full confrontation in order to preserve their forces for future battles. And this refusal was not simply weakness or underestimation of the enemy. It was a manifestation of their strategic thinking, which ultimately determined the outcome of the campaign. Moving to the broader implications, one must ask, what lessons were learned from this for future naval and air operations? What changes occurred in the tactics and strategy of the Allied forces after that night? The answer is clear. The lessons were harsh, significant, and ultimately fateful. They taught the Allies that control over maritime communications is not only a matter of technology and armament, but also a question of strategy, psychological resilience, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. They demonstrated that even in the darkest nights, even when it seems everything is lost, there is room for decisions that can change the course of the entire war. Thus, that night was not just an episode in history. It became a lesson that forever altered the approach to naval warfare, emphasizing the importance of reconnaissance, control, and making the right decisions at critical moments. Ultimately, the analysis shows that the victory at Guadalcanal and the subsequent decisions were the result not only of military strength, but also of wisdom, foresight, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. And this is the main lesson we can draw from that dramatic night. In war, victory does not always go to the stronger, but to those who know how to choose the right moment, make the right decision, and embed it into the core of their strategy.